Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Starring Clark Gregg, Ming-Na Wen, Chloe Bennett, Elizabeth Henstridge, Henry Simmons, Natalia Cordova-Buckley, Jeff Ward.
So I just really quickly want to throw this in at the start of the video so that as many people see it as possible. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. may be over, but I'm not going to stop making Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. videos. I've got tons more planned, and also some Marvel Comics videos which will be based around the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. characters. On top of that, if any of you have any thoughts for any videos you would like me to do or any topics you'd like me to cover, not necessarily Marvel related, DC, any of that sort of stuff, then please do let me know in the comments. And as always, make sure to subscribe. And also, there will be full spoilers for the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. final, so if you haven't seen it yet. But anyway, what an insane final to the show. That's 7 seasons done forever, and it's kind of insane to think about how the show is over completely. As far as endings go, I was actually pretty satisfied with where we left off with a lot of the characters. I was really surprised that we pretty much ended in a happy place with all of the main characters. It wasn't like anybody died, it wasn't like anybody left the show in a very depressing way. Everyone seems to be pretty happy. Like, Deke ended up in the 80s. Once again, Deke kind of gets the short end of the stick where he's not really being treated near as fairly as the rest of the characters. But on top of that, we already know that he's a big fan of the 80s. We already know that he can fit in pretty much anywhere. And he's basically the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. in his own timeline now. So there's not a lot to complain about for him. Sure, the timeline gets to rebuild S.H.I.E.L.D. from scratch, but we know from Deke's experience that he can fit in pretty much anywhere. So even though it looks like he got the worst part of the deal, he's still pretty well off. Then we have Coulson, obviously. He didn't shut off like everybody was kind of predicting him to. He's still around. Daisy is off in space now with Sousa and Cora, which is definitely a tease towards S.W.O.R.D. But I'm guessing they either, 1, weren't allowed name drop S.W.O.R.D., or 2, they just weren't allowed to use the logo for S.W.O.R.D. since they don't know what kind of logo the MCU movies are going to choose for it yet. But either way, there was definitely a nod going, S.W.O.R.D., if it happens, we're still out in space. And also it was Zephyr Tree, I think they call it, so there's 3 Zephyrs now at least. Mack is straight up director of Ground Shield or something it looks like. He was wearing pretty much the Nick Fury trench coat from the early MCU movies, so that was pretty huge. He also has a helicarrier. This is only a year on from the end of season 6, so it's crazy they've done all of this in that amount of time. Fitzsimmons got their happy ending with their child, which was great, amazing. And May is teaching at the academy now with Flint pretty much under her wing, which is really nice. And on top of that, Yo-Yo is now out in the field with Piper and LMD Davis. So everyone kind of ended in some pretty good spots. I don't think this final was as satisfying or as good or even as well written as the season 5 final. I still think that is pretty much top tier for how the show could have ended. But in terms of character finals, you can't really get much better. You can't really be much happier with what we got. Like, if you wanted your characters to end in a happy way, then this episode got them to end in a happy way. They really do want to leave the door open for any of the other cast members, for any of the future characters to return. Like, if they end up appearing in a Marvel movie or in a Marvel TV show down the line, then it's perfect because they were set up from the get-go here. If they don't, then it's still a pretty good ending for the show. So I like how they kind of did that. They didn't really make any definitive endings for any characters. Everyone is kind of up in the air. It also leaves tons of room for future comic books, future novels, anything they want to do to expand the world of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. if the characters don't appear again. I think it's pretty likely we'll see people like Daisy and Coulson again at some point. Maybe not even in an MCU movie. We might see Coulson in flashback stuff. Maybe if Captain Marvel 2 somehow has more flashbacks to the earlier eras of S.H.I.E.L.D., then we may see Coulson again in that, but it obviously won't be LMD Coulson. But in terms of these characters, the versions that we left off with, I don't think it's likely we'll see them in a movie, but I think it's possible we'll see them in a Disney Plus TV show. On top of that, if at some point in the near future or in the later future that Feige and the Marvel people decide to branch out from Disney Plus shows, if they decide to go back to making shows with Hulu and Freeform and ABC, then I think if that ever happens, we will 100% see the return of a lot of these characters. I think, like, in terms of appearing in the movies, I would say maybe 10 to 15%. Appearing in Disney Plus show, probably 30 to 40%. But appearing again, if Marvel ever decides to make TV shows outside of Disney Plus, I think like 90% chance we'll see a lot of these characters return. So, and that's actually another thing. I didn't get too emotional during this. I didn't get near as emotional as I thought I would. Mainly because it didn't feel like an ending for these characters. It didn't feel like we were saying goodbye to them. It felt more like you're gonna see them again at some point, and I think that was very deliberate. They want us to want these characters to come back. They want us to think we're going to see them again, because if we do see them again, it'll make it that much better. But it didn't make me as emotional as I thought it would, and that's not a bad thing. I'm happy we had a cheerful ending. It was kind of nice after so many years of the show really giving us gut punches at the end of seasons, killing off characters, sending Fitz and Simmons and everyone else through so much trauma, to actually end with everybody pretty happy. It also is a little bit sad that pretty much what Daisy predicted was going to come true, that the characters, they meet up once a year, they're just the people who used to work together. Sure, they all still technically work together, but it's not like they're working on the same team. It's not like they're meeting up the whole time, and that is a little bit sad that these characters, they're not the team anymore. But you know, you can't really complain about how everyone kind of got a happy ending. One thing I was really surprised about is when Fitz returned, which, gotta say, so happy about that. Pretty much every prediction I made turned out to be wrong, which I'm completely fine with, because a lot of my predictions didn't have me too hopeful for certain things. But Fitz showing up the end of episode 12 and being there through all of episode 13 with the team was perfect. It turns out that all that worrying about Fitz dying, it shouldn't have been worrying about it at all. But it was amazing that he came back. But I was actually really surprised about how that was basically Fitz from the end of season 6. There was like probably about I'd say a 5 or 6 year gap between where we last saw him and now, which isn't near as much as myself or a lot of other people thought. I would think it was like 10, 20 years it was going to be, just because of how the Gemma, for example, and Enoch were talking about the time that had been spent trying to fix this time machine, trying to make LMD Coulson and all that sort of stuff. It made it sound like it had been decades and that something serious had gone wrong. But now, it hasn't actually been that long. They got to raise a child, they got to live a pretty happy and decent couple of years together. So yeah, it basically was just normal Fitz. I also loved the second he returned, and when he was immediately kind of jump into it to make the new time drive, or whatever you want to call it. I liked how immediately everyone was like, no, Fitz, stop, you gotta start talking. I was like, May got really angry for a second, was like, tell us where you were, Fitz. That was really great. I did like that. That was a lot of good interactions. That really reminded me of, I guess, some of my favorite parts of season 6 was stuff like that, where all of the characters were in one place same time and they were having those kind of interactions. Season 5 was great for that sort of stuff, so it was really great to see that in this. In terms of that whole scene with the time drive in I think it was the crazy canoe they were in, that was a little bit weird. Now, it was cool seeing Victoria Hand again, don't get me wrong, but the other characters that came out of the shadows to give the pieces to build the time drive to bring Fitz back, that was weird to me. I don't know whether it was how they decided to direct it or how they decided to write it, but they made it seem like a lot of those characters were much more important than they were. Like the guy who came in with the final piece, who came in off I think he said he missed the bus or something. The way he was revealed made it seem like he was supposed to be a big important character, but he was kind of just a random guy. And same with the first person who was revealed to us. Hand was an actual reveal, but the other characters weren't so much. I don't know if it's just me who felt that way. It was just a little bit weird to me. On top of that, can't believe we got the quantum realm in this. That's straight up out of Endgame. Like, they literally used the same time travel concept that Endgame used to explain time travel in this, which was perfect. I'm still not 100% in it being the MCU timeline. I'll get into that in a second, but at least we know it's straight up the same multiverse because they're using the same time travel concept. I was really surprised nothing about the snap, and that's why I still don't think this is the MCU timeline, because if it was the MCU timeline, I think they definitely would have given us something about the snap, because obviously they were tying into Endgame. They wouldn't have known about all that quantum realm stuff if they hadn't seen Endgame, so obviously the snap, they knew all about that. Also, the effects on the Zephyr when it was jumping into the quantum realm was just like the stuff from Endgame and Ant-Man and the Wasp, so that was amazing. But in terms of the MCU stuff, we didn't get anything to do with the snap, and this episode would have taken place in 2020 because season 5 was 2018, Then season 5 ended with a 1-year jump, which would have made season 6 be in 2019, and then we get another 1-year jump, so we're in 2020, and the people who were snapped don't come back till 2023, so this is still in the middle of Earth's dark ages if it was the MCU, so that's just why I personally still think that they're in a separate timeline. But all the stuff with Piper and Davis was great. I loved how Piper's one wish, or the one reward she wanted, was to bring Davis back. Like, because I love that dynamic they have in season 6 about how despite how much they give each other grief and they kind of are at each other's throats, they're still probably each other's best friends, which was really nice and sweet. The whole thing with Garrett was a little bit weird. I liked that they kind of turned him back, I guess, but then killing him right afterwards was very anticlimactic. But I kind of understand it, mainly because Victoria Hand, she died in the original timeline basically because of Garrett, so it made sense that she was the one who killed him in this timeline. Now my one major disappointment, and this is kind of the thing that has dampened the whole season for me, is the villains. How they handle the villains, not just in this episode, but in the entire season, isn't great in my opinion. Mainly the Chronicoms, how they defeated them in this was pretty ridiculous. May just drops down on top of Sybil's head, and then Sybil's just done for the rest of the episode. She doesn't show up again, she doesn't get a reference again, and they basically stop the Chronicoms by making them feel too much or giving them empathy, which, I get it, I mean, they're being rushed with emotions at once, yeah, they're going to be kind of freaking out, they're not going to know what's going on. I don't think that that's going to make every single one of them decide to be friends with the S.H.I.E.L.D. team immediately. That was a little bit far-fetched for me. I know that, I mean, this is Marvel, everything's far-fetched, but that was a little bit too cheesy, too weird. It didn't fit in with what the rest of the episode was, I just felt that that was a little bit of it. They didn't know how they were going to beat the Chronicoms. Throw in something quick because we only have 10 minutes left and we need to start wrapping up what's happening with the characters. So that was a little bit weird to me. On top of that, Mack, I don't know what they were trying to do there. That's so much of the season was spent on that character, and I think it was wasted, to be honest. The final battle between him and Daisy was quite great. I was a pretty big fan of a lot of the cool moves they did there, but as a whole, like, Daisy versus Mack wasn't near as cool as Daisy versus Talbot, or it wasn't near as cool as Daisy versus even the Superior halfway through season 4, so that's a little bit disappointing. Cora, on top of that, I felt that Cora, I don't know if they knew how to write Cora properly. I don't know what it is, but it felt like every episode she had different motivations, or she was written in a different way, and it doesn't really add up to me. Like the fact that she went from wanting to kill Daisy to then actually wanting to be with Daisy to saving Daisy's life to being a member of S.W.O.R.D. or S.H.I.E.L.D. when last episode she was also pretending to be a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. but then she ended up switching sides so that she could get all the S.H.I.E.L.D. bases to Sybil. It was very weird. I don't know, if I just didn't like it. I think that in terms of villains, this might be the worst season for villains, because even though I wasn't big on Azel from season 6, Sarge still definitely evened that out for me. This season though, besides maybe Garrett, I didn't have a single villain that I enjoyed or I could latch onto, so that was a bit annoying, and I would say that that's my only huge complaint with the season or the episodes. Well, obviously Fitz not being around for most of his complaint, but I was pretty happy with how they brought Fitz into it at the very end, so that kind of does lessen that blow for me. But in terms of villains, that's pretty much my big complaint of the season. I got some serious Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica vibes from all of the Chronicom ship stuff. Definitely Star Trek in terms of how Sybil just ordered the Chronicoms not to engage with Daisy and Gemma and Deke when they thought that they were important. That kind of reminded me like Borg drones from Star Trek, just avoiding the characters when the Borg Queen thinks the characters are important. So that was pretty interesting. The soundtrack also, as always, was phenomenal. I really hope now this show is over, we can get an official soundtrack release for seasons 3 to 7. We do have the season 1 and 2 release, and there's some amazing fan-made versions of the themes out there where people have just basically recreated the music from seasons 3 to 6 and some of season 7. Soundtrack Nerdist on YouTube is amazing for that. If you haven't seen his renditions of the soundtracks or his versions of the recreations of the soundtracks, check them out. They're pretty much flawless. You can barely ever hear any of the actual stuff happening in the episode in those soundtracks. They sound like they're official, but I hope that we do get an official release from Marvel Music or whoever does the Marvel soundtracks now that the show is over. I think a proper, like just the big bits of music from every single season would be great for one kind of soundtrack. One thing that's kind of annoyed me with the Arrowverse lately is that they've actually stopped doing the soundtracks for the Arrowverse. They used to release every Arrowverse soundtrack each year, and even the crossover soundtracks used to get releases, and now they basically stopped. So hopefully S.H.I.E.L.D. can get a proper finished soundtrack, which would be amazing. But yeah, while it wasn't as satisfying, it didn't hit as hard as Season 5. I think in terms of endings, you couldn't have gone much better. I think not showing something with Deke towards the end was a little weird. On top of that, in terms of returning characters, the season definitely lacked in that department. The fact that pretty much every returning character we got, besides like Davis, Piper, Rick Stoner, and Flint, ended up being different actors. I know in some circumstances they just couldn't be avoided, where the actor was dead or deceased, but sometimes I didn't understand why they decided to go with a brand new actor or actress for a certain character. But yeah, no Ward, no Hunter, no Bobby, no Ghost Rider. There's a lot of characters out there who didn't get to have a last hurrah of the show. But, you know, I can't use it against them. There was probably reasons why they couldn't. They had to shoot this season back-to-back with Season 6 with not a lot of notice, which is why Ian didn't get to be in a lot of it. So I can't blame them there when it might not have been their fault. But what did you think of the episode? Did you love the final? Did you hate the final? Did you think it was perfect? Did you think it had issues? And remember, I'm going to be making still a ton more Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. videos. And please remember to like, share, subscribe, and all of that. And I hope you have an amazing day.